Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first virtual wildlife area planning focal type meeting. This is actually an extension of the external planning process. We kicked off the Olympic-Willapa wildlife area planning process last year, and we had a public workshop in South Bend in April. And we wanted to find a way to outreach to folks that could not attend that specific meeting. So we're in the process of updating the wildlife area plan. And we're actually going to be including a recreation component as well in that. The last plan was written in 2006. And this is actually one of two public workshop. It's a virtual meeting, Zoom meetings that we're holding. The next one is scheduled for April 16th at the same time, and the topic is restoration. So, and then just a little bit of background, if you're not familiar with the wildlife area, there's 3 wildlife areas within this complex. They include Chehalis, Johns River, and the Olympic wildlife areas. And it's about 14,000 acres, 20 units. So I'd like to introduce the panel for this meeting tonight. I will just go through. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hey everybody, Nick Bechtold, Wildlife Area Manager.
Thanks, Nick. Matt?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. Matt Blankenship. I'm the Assistant Regional Wildlife Program Manager and oversee the lands and water access activities here in Region 6 in the coastal region. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Matt. Bridget?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bridget Meir. I'm Region 6 or Coastal Region Communication Specialist.
Anthony?
Hello, I'm Anthony Novak. I'm the District Wildlife Biologist covering Pacific and Grays Harbor counties.
And Kyle?
Good evening, folks. I'm Kyle Spraggins, the Waterfowl Section Manager, getting to deal with waterfowl topics in Washington and the Pacific Flyway.
Thank you. I'm Lori Vigu. I'm located in Olympia, and I'm the lead project planner for this wildlife area planning process. So, Kyle.
Yep, I'm going to start, Lori.
Gotcha.
So, welcome everybody. So this is a first virtual meeting where we can try to get a specific topic and get some back and forth discussion on some of these topics related to our management of the wildlife area going on into the future. As we start or get into it, if you have any ideas or things that you want discussed or have questions, we'll probably cover them at the end of the presentation. Sounds like chat's not working, but there's a question and answer section that you can put your questions into. All right, next slide. So the Olympic-Willapa Hills Complex, as Lori mentioned, covers a wide area. This map just shows the Johns River Wildlife Area Vicinity map on the coast from Grays Harbor and Willapa Bay. The portions owned by WDFW are highlighted in dark green, and then other public lands are in pink and brown as you go. And from north to south, we have the Oyhut area in Ocean Shores. We have South Grays Harbor unit, Johns River unit, and Elk River unit up on the southern coast of Grays Harbor. Further south we go, we have the North Willapa Bay unit at the north end of Willapa Bay, on the South Bend, and then further south Nema. And then Chinook is all the way at the south, near the Columbia River. And then we have a tiny parcel for silver spot butterflies. What's off the map to the north is the headquarters near the Wishkah. And then down the Chehalis River to the east, we have the Chehalis unit, Furbisher, and then Hoxit, which are all part of this complex. Okay, next slide, and I'll pass it on to Kyle.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, so I get the opportunity to sort of paint the context here. Washington sits in a very unique spot geographically in what is referred to as the Pacific Flyway, this sort of corridor of movements from breeding areas in Alaska and parts of Canada through Washington on down to areas much further south than here, depending on what species we're talking about. But because of this crossroads that Washington serves, we have a tremendous number of species, a tremendous amount of responsibility in terms of trying to coordinate this uh, broad swath of species that are after different habitats at different times of the year. This includes 27 total species of ducks, including dabbling ducks, diving ducks, sea ducks, wood ducks, ruddy ducks, 6 species of geese. And from a management perspective, when we talk about how we coordinate between the other states and provinces of Canada that these birds are moving through, we're talking about 12 different management populations of goose species that cross through Washington. Largely dominated by what I refer to as white-cheeked geese, 4 subspecies of Canada goose, 3 subspecies of cackling goose, snow geese, small number of Ross's geese if you look for them, white-fronted geese, which very rarely land, but numerous of them pass through both directions during migration. And then brant, sort of the eelgrass specialist of the goose, the sea goose version within the goose clan. We also have 2 species of swan. And while not waterfowl, we also have obligations for other migratory game birds such as snipe and coot that are highly dependent on wetland habitats, very similar to waterfowl. Next slide. So, the term of this species group is very handy, right? They are waterfowl. They need wetlands, and so that lends itself very well to sort of capsulating this. How do we think about ways of influencing both the habitat on the ground and hopefully the species or population of interest? But because of that crossroads nature of Washington, we do have obligations year-round from nesting through the flightless periods of molt, fall migration, winter, and then spring migration as they're returning back. And we, depending on where you are in the state, this looks differently. And depending on which species we're talking about, the requirements are often shaped differently. But in general, the sort of overarching similarity is that waterfowl need all types of wetlands at all times of year, but primarily based on this requirement for food and refuge or resting areas. But there's other activities that sometimes go sort of unheralded. Brood rearing, molt when they're flightless, roosts, these sort of low disturbance areas, and to fulfill certain behavioral requirements such as pair formation or courtship flights that precede the breeding events that we're hoping that they get back to. Next slide. So to illustrate this, can you advance to the next one? There we go. So to illustrate this, seasonality is a big component of when we're talking about waterfowl moving through Washington. When we start honing in on particular areas of Washington, the sort of when is the demand, the timing of that demand. And we can kind of paint this example with information that comes from eBird. You can build these sort of migration chronologies, the shape of when pulses of movement are for certain species are recorded and then extrapolated out to the rest of the state. In this example, what this is portraying is specifically observations from Grays Harbor County and Pacific County of cackling goose in blue, American widgeon in the pink, mallard in the green, and northern pintail in that sort of golden yellow color. And what you'll see, what we framed here is that, that orange block is denoting the hunting period, the typical duck season, which opens somewhere in mid-October and can't run any later than January 31st. And what you'll see is, while there is a big demand in that early season, that's not the only time period that the birds are in this area. And so when you're trying to talk about sort of the requirements, habitat requirements, what types of wetlands are we talking about? It really depends on the species. It depends on when they're passing through. And this sort of requirement beyond just during the hunting season is something that we have to take into consideration. Next slide. The next slide illustrates this sort of the grandeur of this requirement, right? This is an example of northern pintail, and and I'll note that the marked birds were put out in 2017 pre high path avian influenza. Uh, this marking of pintail showcases that that cluster of red is every dot of a marked pintail that wound up in Washington from a group of pintail that were marked and released down in the Central Valley of California. What you'll note is that these individuals are broadly distributed, right? These are birds that are making their way back up to breeding areas in Canada and Alaska, and then coming back through various routes on their way back to either wintering here in Washington or on their way down to the Central Valley. What I want to note, though, is those eastern cluster of red points are largely spring in nature. They occur in the springtime as birds are moving back north through Alberta or on their way to Alberta. But that cluster that hits the southwest corner is largely during the fall migration period, which is portrayed as this sort of big peak that happens right in sort of early October, which people see readily in places like Willapa Bay and the lower Columbia River. We expect to see some of these long distance migrants like American widgeon and northern pintail on fall migration into the area. Next slide. But to contrast that, if we talk about something like a cackling goose, a cackler, the small minima, the smallest of the white-cheeked geese, you'll see that there is this exceptional peak that happens late in spring. And that shouldn't be surprising. The bulk of the wintering area is in the Willamette Valley and into the southwest Washington 5 counties. But when we get into spring migration and these birds are on their way back to Alaska, noting that this particular subspecies all nests in one small area of the Yukon Delta National Wildlife Refuge, this is one of the last fueling stops. This is one of the last places that they can really pick up protein, which directly influences whether or not they're going to be in condition to put eggs on the ground and how many eggs they're going to put on the ground. In the geese and swans and those bigger bodied waterfowl, the requirement of food in spring is not subtle. It's directly related to that future reproductive opportunity. And if we go to the next slide, when we talk about some of the management considerations, for example, the goose management areas are very much shaped by the presence of certain species or subspecies in that area. And goose management area 2 has always been shaped by the white-cheeked geese, specifically dusky Canada goose, which is just a low abundance, low reproductive species to begin with, and cackling goose. And while it's hard to see in that lower right corner, we are in a time period right now where the cacklers, those minima, the small little guys, are 46% below their population objective. We are trending towards a closure threshold. And so the question becomes, well, while we can use harvest as one tool, that doesn't always change the trajectory. Habitat is what changes the trajectory because of that sequence, that sort of domino sequence of if they get the food and get back to the breeding grounds in good condition, there's a higher probability of reproductive success. That spring requirement does not occur during the hunting season. So to try and put influences on the ground at the right time, the next question is, well, where do we do that? And so this next slide, it talks about this, right? So availability. Availability is this concept in the waterfowl side of things. Because they fly, folks often think, well, they'll just find what they need wherever it happens to be on the landscape. And while that's sort of true, the landscape shapes the pattern of use. Whether or not these sort of basic habitat requirements that all waterfowl need, the specifics might differ, but these sort of generalities of all waterfowl must find resting areas or roosts where these sites allow them to minimize how much energy they're burning every day, how much calories they're burning off. Flight is expensive. It is a very expensive activity to fly from a roost to a feeding field, or to be flushed by eagles, or to be moved. And so that ability to try and lower that disturbance and minimize that energy expenditure is what the function of something like a roost or a refuge is out on the landscape. All waterfowl have to find foods. The type of food might differ a little bit. I mentioned brant. Brant are an eelgrass specialist. They really don't target much else other than eelgrass. So that is that food requirement that they have. But it's not just food that's necessarily intake that the species or different species are trying to find. It's nutrients, grit, remembering that waterfowl don't have teeth. They have to ingest rock fragments to grind up anything that they eat. If they don't ingest enough of that sort of rock, fine sand replacement, they can't actually make any use of whatever it is they're ingesting. It doesn't extract the proper nutrients that they need. And then the final one is calcium. Oftentimes, we maybe undersell the need for calcium, but when you have a bunch of birds that are trying to make their way back north to go and lay eggs, hopefully, one of the main demands that they will have is to have a calcium source that they can produce the eggshells with. So food or these other ingestible items are another major requirement that has to be on that landscape. And the final one is water. And while it may immediately seem like, well, that should just be in refuge or food, sometimes it is, but sometimes that sort of ability to access a site, or the availability of water in a field to easily digest something like grass if you're a goose, and to facilitate some of these other behaviors aren't always necessarily in the same spot on the landscape. And so these sort of three key components, those arrows are trying to illustrate the fact that, the closer that those three requirements are together, the better. You will likely have either more birds or birds there for longer periods of time. But the more that you separate those, and that could either be physically through making them further away from each other, or it could be through the sort of intensity or frequency of disturbance events. And there's a multitude of what that could mean. Eagles flushing birds is one of the biggest waterfowl sort of disturbances that is commonly occurring. And so whether it's harvest pressure or some of the other disturbance types that can occur out there, it creates a barrier of access. If it separates this ability to move easily between food and roost, that's going to be problematic. It's going to change how that landscape is actually going to facilitate what's out there. The next slide sort of illustrates this. This is one marked mallard that just recently was deployed up in the Dungeness Squim area, but it perfectly illustrates this. There are four or five main points that the bird is moving between, which suggests they are not able to get everything they need from any one spot. The orientation of this is such that that middle one, I don't have a pointer that works, is a forage field, and everything else is probably some sort of roost, whether it's nighttime or daytime, or it's concealed in these sort of forested shrub areas because they're trying to avoid predation. This is a big eagle presence area. What I'll note from that picture, though, is while I don't have it identified that way, this landscape is not just a wildlife area. This is a conglomerate of public and private lands. It's a conglomerate of lands that have a conservation easement, lands that are under protection, lands that are active dairy farms in certain cases. And so this is why we work with partners beyond just our wildlife area, because when we are talking about waterfowl, while we are trying to shape where is that best role for our lands to play to fit on the when and the where of those requirements, trying to figure out what might be missing on that landscape is often just as important in trying to figure out, well, what is the best thing that we could do out there? Next slide. So that was a very quick overview, and I realize that. I guess the point of this is it is to be able to sort of balance these requirements of wanting to provide hunting opportunity, but wanting to make sure that we're able to put habitat on the ground. There is a lot of sort of, well, how does that checkerboard look depending on the species that we're talking about? If we're trying to provide food for dabbling ducks, that's a very fall oriented thing. If we're trying to provide spring forage for geese because we're concerned about population status of something like the cackling goose, that's going to be a very spring oriented activity. And so whether it's on our lands or working in partnership with folks like Ducks Unlimited or other entities that allow us to work in that sort of public-private space, that is all in the same guise of we can only do so much in a particular parcel of land. What's the right thing to do is how we're trying to influence this, this sort of need, this ultimate need of waterfowl. And I think I have one more. I wanted to provide this as an example of sort of this sort of balancing conundrum. Back in 2021, during one of our 3-year season setting cycles, we asked about this concept of waterfowl regulated access areas. And the question to public input at that time was, what should WDFW prioritize when crafting waterfowl hunting opportunities on public lands? And remembering that there's a bunch there's several different things that influence what a waterfowl hunting experience winds up looking like. There's waterfowl productivity both on the local and the flyway scale. There's that seasonality part. There's the where is it in proximity to one of those key components, whether it's foraging or resting. How good? What's the quality? And quality can often be shaped by that sort of disturbance level of can they get to it? Or is there enough water that even if there's the food, can they actually ingest it, right? So this quality of wetland habitat certainly influences it. And that amount of disturbance or the frequency of disturbance. All of this is sort of this balancing act of how do we shape and influence this landscape to provide all of those fundamental sort of desires. When we asked that question, interestingly, the 5 alternatives that were sort of posed to folks was, well, we just do what we do and leave it how we normally manage our wildlife areas. We either prioritize the waterfowl populations and sort of habitat side. We prioritize just the hunting side. We work with local stakeholders to kind of craft something much more specific. But the overwhelming selection of the 939 comments was a combination of all that, right? It's not a one size fits all. You really have to sort of examine each one of the units in that context that I painted about the when and the where and what species to really try to fit that right. And so this is a great example of while there's sort of the population and the sort of behavioral considerations, applying that to the ground, on the ground, what Nick and folks are doing out there is certainly this sort of weighing the options. And that's where this type of forum and these types of this input ability is great. And I certainly hope that gave a little bit more context of what we're hoping to get from folks. And I think that hands it over to Anthony to describe some more about the wildlife area itself.
Yep. Next slide. Okay. So back to this map. Thanks, Kyle. Back to this map of the coastal areas, Grays Harbor, Willapa. The agency, the wildlife area consists of a large acreage of land, but not all of that acreage is A, it's not all wetlands, and B, of all the wetlands, it's not all actively managed. Like there's not a heavy effort to change the habitat or change the access. The primary sites here on the coast are the Johns River Wildlife Area, the North Willapa unit outside of the Raymond Airport, and then the Chinook unit. And then off the map would be the Chehalis unit and the Hawk City units. Next slide. So what are some examples that we currently have of active habitat or access management, and are also examples of things that maybe can be proposed for other areas? So one big one is water control structures. So these are structures that are put in place in order to control water levels for the benefit of waterfowl, either in the form of like creating water levels that are attractive to waterfowl for dabbling ducks or for geese. You can manage the depth of that water during the course of the winter. And then it can also be used as a management tool for managing the vegetation under the area that's to be flooded. And in particular here, we have reed canary grass the longer you can keep reed canary grass wet. It's a non-native. It's not very desirable. The longer you can keep its feet wet, the better able you are to try to manage and control it. And then there's other species that can benefit by manipulating the moisture levels in the soil. Places where we have water control structures currently, the Johns River unit just had its water control structure replaced. Had one in the past that was non-functioning. It's just been replaced. The Hoxett unit, which is near between Porter and Oakville along the Chehalis, that's had its water control structure replaced recently. And there's currently a project working its way through with Ducks Unlimited at the Elk River unit near Westport to replace a failed structure that's on, or that would impound water on agency property up there. Next slide. So another example, habitat manipulation. So how do we create the conditions or the mix of plant species and habitats that are preferred for waterfowl for foraging? Examples are plantings, and this could be these could be agricultural plantings, mowing, certainly weed control. Smart weed is an example of a plant that waterfowl really like. That's a native. In areas of pasture grass or non-native grass, the geese in particular prefer to forage in areas where that grass is less than 6 inches high. That's the palatable grass that they can actually get to and utilize. Once it gets taller than that, they don't make much use of it. And then part of our areas in the Chehalis unit, for instance, or next door in Scatter Creek can be used for agriculture. That can be corn or wheat or other crops that are planted partly to draw in the waterfowl. Next slide. Okay, and then access management. So what are we doing to manage, recreational access, particularly waterfowl hunting? So we have sites, various sites where we have duck blinds. There's a pair of ADA accessible duck blinds, Chehalis units. Forget where the other one is off the top of my head. We have duck blinds at Potter Slough. Johns River is the other ADA unit. And then we don't have duck blinds at Willapa, but we have in place outside the Raymond Airport a limited entry hunt. It's a hunt by reservation, similar to what occurs on private lands. So for waterfowl hunting, we've limited the number of days that hunting is allowed at those sites to just 3 days a week. There's a sign posted at the gates. You have to reserve your place to hunt ahead of time. Or if there's nobody, if the site has not been reserved, or if somebody got in with a reservation and they already got their limit and left, then hunters can make use of that area by registering to hunt. And for that site in particular, there's 5 specific sites where if you are the hunter at that entrance, that's your area. Nobody else can be in that area. So yeah, Potter Slough, Johns River, Chehalis, and Willapa is where we have these limited entry access sites. And then boat launches. I mean, we have places where boat launches which cover, canoes and kayaks and duck hunting boats as well as for fishing access. Next slide. So those are the examples of what we are doing for active management within the wildlife area complex now. Within the state of Washington, at other wildlife areas in other regions and or on refuge land, there are other actions that are being taken to manage either for habitat or for recreational access. Grazing is one in particular that is used at other sites. Grazing is a tool in order to get that grass that we talked about to under 6 inches of height, which is simpler and easier than mowing or haying or doing other things. We have put in place some areas where there are game reserves. These are places where we've designated them to be off limits to hunting, and so that provides a refuge for waterfowl during the regular hunting season. Another example is shell restrictions. There are I know of refuges anyway where there may be a 15 shell or 25 shell limit. So you go in for your day of hunting, you're limited to this number of shells. Once you've shot all your shells, then you're done for the day. And that's a way to limit the amount of pressure and limit the amount of wounding loss to birds. Or turn off times where it says that you can only hunt in the morning, and then after 12, everybody needs to get out there. So these are all options that we could implement here if that's the desire, or that makes sense. Constraints on what we can do. We do have some constraints that are logistical or regulatory, especially with water control structures. Where you can put a water control structure has to overlap with issues related to fish passage and salmon and fish management. There's also the limitation of staff capacity. We have our wildlife area manager. He has 2 technicians. There are some other support people, but it's a very large area, so we can't do all things in all places. And of course, there's what's the cost benefit? There's a heavy investment involved in some of these things. Is there the benefit to waterfowl that's worth putting that investment in? And then some of these, some of the constraints are just the site history. What has happened in the past is usually the easiest thing to keep doing. It's hard to do something new that's drastically different. And so anyway, final note, habitat value versus access value, like potentially there's trade-offs here. It's like allowing access for recreational activity can have impact on the habitat value for that area. And so if there's a trade-off, you have to balance what's more important for that specific site. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we're putting it to our audience. So this is the time where we're done going through our presentation. So it's time for questions, either through the Q&A or I think we can off mic people. And some of the questions we might have to you specifically is like, what units do we want to tilt waterfowl management to benefit the waterfowl populations of wetlands? What kind of habitat management should we explore or implement on some of these sites? And where do we want to do that? Where, if anywhere, do we want regulated access? In most of our wildlife area properties, the season for waterfowl is 7 days a week, for ducks anyway. And so is that something we want in all those places, or should we look to pare it back in some places? So here's the pause. Hoping for some Q&A in question and answer, or somebody raise a hand and we can bring it up. And I'll pause for about a minute and then I'll call on people. Or Matt, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was curious, Bridget. I don't know if attendees have the ability to do a raise hand function or not, but if you folks are hearing me and if you don't have that function on there, I think primarily the Q&A is a great way to pop in some questions, and we can all see those and we can answer those live here if we can unmute you.
Yeah, and you can raise your hand and I'll allow you to talk as well.
Okay, awesome.
All right, so looks like Michael Norden has his hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, so you can hear me, but you can't see me, which is just fine. By the way, Lori, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you from years ago. But anyway, Mike Norden, I'm the manager of the Pacific Conservation District. I also wear many, many other hats, including the Washington Coast Marine Advisory Council. I'm the chair of the Pacific County Marine Resource Committee. I'm on the lead entity for Pacific. I'm also on the Noxious Weed Board for Pacific County. So one of the main problems or hurdles, or whatever you want to call it, that we've run into is that in Pacific County, because I no longer manage Grays Harbor, they can do whatever they want up there, but for Pacific, we do not feel there's been enough buy-off or okay or approval of land acquisitions in our county. Here at the district, and I'll just say that for a lot of different conservation practices, we weigh a middle ground. For instance, if we're going to take a dike out or remove a dike, if there's active ag lands behind it, we do not move or work to remove that dike. However, if there is no activity like we did on Soap Cheatham Creek and also down on Smith Creek and Nasell, we will remove the dikes if there's no active ag land. We are in desperation to maintain our ag revenues and natural resource revenues for our county. It is our lifeblood. And so when we have a conversion from ag land to waterfowl, duck habitat, hunting, um, that if it's active ag land, that harms us. That takes it out of protection. It harms our tax base, revenues for the county, and just income that is for keeping families healthy. Um, People have done the, well, you bring in dollars with people visiting in to go duck hunting. We've done our own personal study, and those numbers do not hold up whatsoever, especially us being so close to the I-5 corridor. People fuel up in the I-5. They usually bring a sack lunch, pack for the day, bring it down, do their hunting, and then they head home. There's no revenue for us in that any way, shape, or form of that. We feel like we have already a lot of duck hunting opportunity and duck or waterfowl habitat in our county that already exists. And we work hard to try and maintain and protect those habitats. Even though we're not a preservationist organization, we do support our local shellfish industry. So if we maintain, it's kind of a synergistic kind of preservation activity. If we protect those wetlands, we're protecting our shellfish farmers. So saying that, what we would like to see happen is that there is no land acquisition in our county before two things happen. One, a majority decision by our county commissioners approving of the purchase, or that they do not want to stand in the way of it, and that the same thing with our conservation district board of supervisors. That if those two bodies do not buy off on it, it should not happen, should not occur. And we do our full vetting of knowing that this is a good area to acquire. For instance, on Government Road, WDFW purchasing that ground, or actually some of the ground that you're working around, like the mouths of Smith Creek and North River. Our supervisors are supportive of those. However, the purchase of a property that's near the airport, we were adamantly opposed to it, and that went on deaf ears. So we have a problem. We need to be listened to and heard. So I really seriously wish you'd take this in consideration when moving forward with your planning. And the model we're suggesting could be used in other counties also. When the acquisitions were first being put forward for the properties around the airport, I talked to my county commissioners and they didn't know anything about it. And my board, the only reason they knew about it is because I heard about it and brought it to them. So anyway, that's all I got to say. I wish you guys luck. Being in the public arena like we all are is a difficult thing, and I know you have to hear hard things, but I hope you take this in consideration if this is I think, a good middle moderate ground kind of suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that, and look forward to continue working with you as we go through this planning process as part of our wildlife area planning committee there, and making sure we're getting your input heard. So we heard you loud and clear. Really appreciate that. Yeah, appreciate your time.
And I'll be around for the next 8 years until I retire and I move to Norway, and then I'm gone.
There you go.
No, I will note, we do at the airport property, like that is an example. That's the example we're looking at, is like grazing in particular would be the best option to keep and maintain that habitat for geese. And so I
Yeah,
think,
but
Mike, with your group, we could probably appreciate help as we develop that grazing plan to try to get it to where it's workable with an operator in the area.
the other issues with there though is that it's as you know, the property land ownership is a checkered pattern.
Hmm.
And with people duck hunting, usually with people with firearms, that doesn't really go well with cattle that are in the area.
Yep.
Okay, we got some Q&A questions. Frank Lyman says, having some more areas that are limited to only a few days a week would benefit waterfowl, also make hunting better on the days it is open, relative to pounding the ducks 7 days a week. Yep, appreciate that, Frank. He also suggests mixing it up, having limited days, some places, I guess Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday, and other areas Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, for instance. Which is interesting. The couldn't do that with geese, but I guess it would be feasible with waterfowl. I don't know, Frank, if you've got any specific areas you think that you'd like to see that. He says no.
There was another question that I wanted to address for the group from Nick Reynolds, which was, do you have a ranked list of these properties that indicates which are more valuable for wildlife?
Yeah, so I did answer in the chat, and I'll go into that. So we don't know, like a ranked list, no. There was a point in time before some of the acquisitions that we've made where we sort of laid out some are sort of high quality, some are middle quality, some are low, and what the time frames were. There was a little bit of a guide to waterfowl hunting, specifically for waterfowl, but not a true ranking. We do have, and I mentioned in the response, like we do conduct goose surveys on a twice a month basis during the wintertime, once the geese start showing up. And so that gives us, I don't really know can't remember how far back that information goes, but that does give us sort of a baseline number. It's a little bit crude, but it does sort of give us some idea of an index of what those numbers are over time, and for some areas over other areas. And that's the airport property in particular was one with really, really high goose numbers, thousands of geese on a regular winter.
So we still have time for some questions. So if anybody wants to put something in the chat or raise your hand, we can go ahead and answer those.
Can I add on to what Anthony answered
Yeah.
there? Yeah, just to kind of tack on a little bit more to that one. Many of the examples that Anthony gave in the presentation of the various sort of actions that could be taken, in many cases, some of that, a good portion of that funding came from waterfowl hunters buying licenses, right? So since 1986, it's been a dedicated account. That's solely the revenue that comes from the state duck stamp, or what is now referred to as the migratory bird permit. And that has gone out in the form of acquisitions and water control structures and those types of projects. It's statewide, right? And so trying to actually influence, waterfowl needs on that sort of bigger, broader level is hard. Sometimes because it's a finite funding source. I guess the piece I was getting to is that in many cases, some of the purchase acquisitions have a justification that kind of laid out like why was that targeted, or why was it targeted with certain funds. And there are certain units in this wildlife area that are certainly along those lines. But yeah, having a formal list that gets tough, because it's sort of like, well, there are many conservation priorities trying to figure out how to get, some of these overlapping ones to fit on the same landscape, is tough, right? As Anthony was saying, there is only so much goose habitat, right? And so when we're trying to influence that, we often have to get creative. What are those partnerships that allow us to put the habitat on the ground, even if it's not on our own acreage, right? And so there are avenues like that. That's where we work with Ducks Unlimited and NRCS and some of these other partner organizations that have funding mechanisms to try and influence that type of work. So I wish we had a more value ranked wildlife list, but that would be probably a long list for us.
There was also a follow-up question from Frank about whether the surveys are available.
Oh, for the numbers? No, we don't have the data is not available unless it's summarized somewhere. All right, somebody's hand is raised. Like John Hardwood.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can, John. Go ahead.
Thank you. I feel very out of place here. I've never hunted a duck in my life, so I'm not sure this is the right place for me to be. But it does sound like you're concerned with other recreational activities on these properties as well. So I live right on the Elk River, right across the river from your Elk River unit, and I am in that area very frequently, like a couple times a month. And I walk down the road that wanders into that unit on a regular basis. I also frequent the Johns River area just for, for wildlife. And that's one thing that does confuse me sometimes is when I think of wildlife, I think of all the wildlife. Yet when you talk about the value, how valuable wildlife is, I don't know if you're talking about waterfowl or if you're talking about all wildlife, because to me, the value of wildlife includes all the shorebird species, the loons and the mergansers, and all of these, and the eagles, ravens, all of this wildlife, which I don't know if that's in your mind when you say the value of a property and its wildlife. So you might kind of clarify that because I spend a lot of time on these units and none of it is for the sake of hunting. And so I know that there is a lot of activity out there, during the hunting months. And sometimes I kind of avoid those areas during those months because I don't want to cross anybody and I don't really know the rules. But I'm frequently out there in my kayak in the spring, especially looking at shorebirds. And the National Wildlife Refuge in Hoquiam, it's a huge deal, the shorebirds that come through that area. And those exact same shorebirds are visiting right here on the Elk River and the Johns River. Yet I don't feel like that's even mentioned. I know that the National Wildlife Refuge does send some field trips over to Bottle Beach State Park and goes there. I don't know if they stop at your Johns River unit or not on that field trip, but they probably couldn't access the Elk River unit if they wanted to view the shorebirds in that area because it's just not accessible the way it's put together. And for that matter, I can't most of the time tell whether I'm on Fish and Wildlife property or if I'm on Laidlaw Hunt Club property because there's no signage indicating, where the property boundaries are. So I just feel like uh, as a user of these units, I can make much better use of these units. If there were more accommodations made for non-waterfowl viewing of wildlife, especially in the off season when there aren't hunters out there. But it seems like just kind of focusing all your efforts on the activities that occur over 3 or 4 months out of the year is, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities to have people go and appreciate these units. So anyway, sorry if I'm outside of the bounds of this particular meeting today, but it seemed like if you were going to talk about other recreational activities that go on there, why you should speak up. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that, John. So you are correct in that. I mean, we are looking at all the wildlife and like part of the acquisitions and part of our management is for all the species that are present in particularly game species and threatened and endangered SGCN species, but really for all wildlife. This topic was waterfowl and wetland focused because we know that's a really big user group and we wanted to maintain sort of a more focused discussion related to that. Our next discussion is going to be about restoration, and so also a little bit broader. But I'm taking some of your comments here about like the signage out at Elk River and paying more attention to the non-consumptive use of wildlife for wildlife viewing outside of the hunting season in particular. So I appreciate the input. And I think if nobody else has something, Lee has his hand up.
Yep. Lee, go ahead.
Lee is still
Lee,
muted.
can you unmute?
Yes,
There he goes.
There we
thank
go.
you. I'd like to echo what John said, and I am also not a hunter, but I'm a regular user of many of these areas. I'm a paddler and a bird watcher. Um, I heard you say something about conglomerate land ownership, and it made me think a lot about the area around Bay Center. And I'm wondering is the South Fork of the Palix one of the units or included in the units that you manage? Um, I'm concerned about that because there's a lot of cattle and there's no fences. And I'm wondering if the concentration of cattle and the damage that they do to plants and water quality is in conflict with migratory waterfowl or bird nesting or bird habitat.
Thanks, Lee. So we don't have cattle grazing on our property, or at least it's not allowed or that we know about. Because in order to get cattle grazing, we have to go through a detailed process of like how that would look and the timing and the number of cattle and things like that. So I don't think the property you're talking about, hopefully it's not our property. If it is, then we really should take a closer look at that.
Okay, thank you.
And I will note that on the Palix, most of our property lies on the middle fork of the Palix, in there. So it's a little bit more isolated, more difficult to get to. So yeah, just kind of put in context of where our property lies.
Any other questions? You can use the Q&A or you can raise your hand.
Or we could call on people.
I'm not seeing any questions right now.
How about Jay Phipps? Jay, you got some comments you can give us?
I see Frank put a question in the chat, or unless but I see Jay's here now. If he's got anything.
Gotta unmute him. There you go. Go ahead, Jay. Nope.
Yeah, no questions there. Will the issue raised by John be available to be brought up at the April presentation? On non-waterfowl wildlife viewing.
I think that presentation's mostly focused on, or if Nick, you can probably jump in on this too, but it's mostly focused on restoration and likely fish passage and other restoration associated work on the wildlife area. But Nick, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it'll address it to a degree. Compared to this presentation, we're looking at sort of having three sort of mini presentations, one focused on forest management, one on estuary restoration, and the other on some endangered species recovery we've been doing for years and years. So all of these projects have both benefits to game and non-game species, but we don't necessarily spell it out in every case.
I'll note, Washington State, we just recently had there was a conference or a academy dedicated to wildlife viewing just a couple of weeks ago. And this agency has a funding source for small grants to promote wildlife viewing projects. So there's definitely a broader interest there across the state to find opportunities where if we can support that kind of activity on a broader scale to do that. I'll note for John and Lee, I have a tentative idea at some point to try to see if there's a value to be able to put in a kayak there at the state park on the northwest corner of the Elk River unit, because you can get into the ponds there and muck around, but I've never gone there myself, so I can't say firsthand if you can get into anything or see anything of value, but we'll explore that. I think Lori's got her hand raised.
I just wanted to point out, I don't know if you participated in the recreation survey we had about a year ago. We do have information, and wildlife viewing actually was very strong in the response, and it was surprising. So it's something we're seriously looking at in the new plan, in the new planning effort. And we are also, as an agency, looking at ways to increase, like putting out, what do they call those trackers, those car counters and other things. We have some limited cell phone data that we use. That's kind of dated now, but we are always looking at ways to find ways to just track activities in our wildlife areas. So it's an ongoing statewide thing we're looking into.
I'll chime in
John.
one more time about recreation, just in general. One of our big challenges out here is land for acquisition is pretty expensive, so we end up with a lot of small properties, and those properties come with very few roads and trails, which makes getting out on the landscape difficult. So it's hard for us to build these after the fact, especially going through various permitting processes. It gets really expensive really fast.
Looks like John has another question. John, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. I was at your South Bend meeting last fall. I think I might have been the only one who was at your meeting last fall. And here I am again, and just kind of wondering how come Lee and I, recreationalists, are the only ones showing up at these meetings. Where are all your hunters? And so, but it does seem like you know, if you're talking about making long range plans for these areas, and that's what you're working on, and it makes sense that recreationalists can weigh in, and that's great, not non-hunters. But I also recognize that a lot of the monetary support for these units comes from the sale of hunting licenses and duck stamps. So I recognize that as well. But as far as access goes, I think Lee and I would both be quite happy with some well-designed kayak and canoe launches in some of these areas. So I think that's all I have to say then. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, John. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for joining us at the last public meeting. Appreciated your input there, and appreciate it here now. So yeah, thank you.
And then Jay Phipps had a question about where do I find maps of these areas, and where are the boat ramps for access?
I want to jump in. Yeah, okay. I'll try to take that one. Jay, so there's a couple different places that you can go and find those. On our website, we have wildlife area specific web pages. You can find basic maps of our wildlife areas and the associated units there, along with some of the other regulations and recreational activities that those wildlife area and their units support. On some of those also includes some of our water access areas. So our wildlife area also includes a couple other boat launches where you can access some of the waterways that we have that are associated with the wildlife areas in those spots. And then there's also water access area. You can search by county on our website. You can look for lake access sites, river access sites, based on where you live and that are owned by WDFW. And then other options include, like Onyx maps, places like that usually have all of our information on there as well. It's a really handy mapping tool and easy to use and interface with.
Looks like we've got a question from Craig Edwards. Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to the guy that says no hunters are here. I'm a hunter. My family homesteaded Wilsonville in 1853. I've hunted there my whole life. My grandfather hunted there. The property you have out there at the Middle Pay Lakes is a good place to hunt. I hunt it every year. So I just wanted to make sure he's aware hunters do care, and I'm here.
Thanks for that, Craig. Yeah, and this is one of the difficult things that we have as an agency and as managers is we're managing these areas for multiple uses. And sometimes that can create a conundrum, but really we're trying to manage these for all of those uses so everybody can get out there and enjoy nature in their way that they do. It could be hunting, it could be wildlife viewing, it could be going on a walk. We want to support all of that access that we can on these wildlife areas. And we hope that everybody gets to enjoy them that way, in the way that they want to.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot more pressure from elk hunters on the Pay Lakes now during elk hunting season because of limited. Back in my day, my family all hunted elk and everything, but you all had access through the woods. The access is limited, and now during elk hunting season, you got boats up there, up the bazoo, and guys camping around there, elk hunting. Are you guys aware of that?
Kind of aware, but probably not to the degree that you are, Craig. We're not out there during the season on boats. But thanks for bringing.
It's changed definitely there, where you're getting a lot more elk hunters up there during the duck hunting season. So I don't know. We're probably screwing it up for them more than they're screwing it up for us. One shot, the elk are the hell out of there, I would think. So yeah, but it's interesting to see that they're running out of places, access to hunt. So for public hunting, they try to catch them crossing between the Niawacum and the Pay Lakes, and through waterways now. Just a note.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think a lot of other hunters too, and the Pay Lakes in particular is kind of one of those spots that's difficult to get to. So maybe there's also probably those hunters that are looking for those spots that are a little bit harder to get to. Maybe you can try to get at elk that there's not going to be a lot of people trying to get at them. So
I have actually watched a guy with a little boat with an elk in it. Thought he was going to swamp before he got to the boat launch. Honest to God, I thought he was one of those paddlers, but it's actually a guy with an elk in his boat. Truly amazing.
Elk hunters are committed, so.
Got a question from Dennis in the chat. When will the draft wildlife area plan be available for review?
That's probably a good question for you, Lori. I don't know if about the draft wildlife area plan.
That's a very good question. It's anticipated that we would have a draft in 2027. But there's some changes on the horizon that might expedite that. But I'm not sure. I can't say a lot about that right now because it's really hot off the presses. But I would say hopefully no later than 2027. I'm optimistic.
Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the Q&A or raise your hand.
Dalton Johnson, you look like a person that has a question or want to make a comment.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are, sir.
Yeah, sorry for the delay. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join this meeting until 7, so I'm not sure what I missed on the subject of waterfowl hunting. And I hate to be the person who comes in late and says, "What did I miss?" But I'm curious because I waterfowl hunt the Ocean Shores unit, probably 20-25 days per duck season. So I've got personally quite a vested interest in whatever's discussed regarding waterfowl management in that area.
We actually didn't talk about that area in the discussion. And I think you're the first person I ever met that hunts that area, really. So is that the Oyhut area or the airport or both of those, Dalton? And is there something you think that we, the agency, should do to improve or to alter what's going on out there?
Well, I appreciate the forum. I hunt the airport area and the Oyhut area. And, as of right now, one of the things that I like about it is that there's not a tremendous amount of pressure from other hunters. I see neighbors out there, and I've had really good interactions with neighbors on a nice day. There might be somebody beach walking. I don't really see conflicts. And I see other hunters out there sometimes. But I think the access is very reasonable. I don't have any complaints about that. Frankly, I think it's a really good scenario. And when I happened to see that this meeting was coming up, I thought, oh God, I hope they don't change anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Skimming through the question answer stuff, I was just going to add sort of a general comment. While this is a waterfowl focused presentation, I hope the impression of the underlying habitat consideration came across. And while it is my job to use waterfowl as a vehicle to try and do better for the habitats, while I say certain species of waterfowl or certain ducks or something like that, if you think of species like American bittern or piebald grebe or Virginia rail or northern harrier or things along those natures, yellow legs, that wetland habitat type is not something that has a lot of funding opportunities to influence. And so, yes, while I use waterfowl as the vehicle, there is absolutely benefits beyond waterfowl. And so that ability to try and find those partnerships, those opportunities to influence certain wetland habitats out there, it's broader than just the ducks, geese, and swans by far. And so I hope folks that are left with that impression is go to a marsh, go to your local marsh and tell me what species there are. And it's a mixture, right? And so trying to use one to sort of booster another is absolutely an underpinning of a lot of the work that we do with the state duck stamp dollars, leveraging, partnering, and trying to influence those wetland habitats that otherwise there's just not a lot of funding opportunities out there.
All right. Well, I think we'll probably have time for maybe like one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up if no one has anything else. And again, you can put it in the Q&A or you can raise your hand. So I see that there's a question here. Frank has a question. Go ahead. Go ahead, Frank. If you could unmute. Frank, could you unmute? So we'll come back to him. So we've got apparently a question from Wiles. If you can hear us, go ahead. Wiles, did you have a question?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Very good. Hey, Lee. I know Lee who spoke earlier, and I think John. I'm a duck hunter 40 years, but I came from out of state, been here 15. I hunt all over most counties or both counties. And my concern is more so the health of the river and the bays. I mean, there's problems. Lee can tell you if she's still there, with a lot of contaminated sites in Aberdeen, Hoquiam area. And if those sites get breached, the widgeon grass beds and oysters and crabs, salmons, birds, etc., might be hurt. What is the wildlife department kind of in concert with the waterkeeper and other environmental groups? You mentioned Ducks Unlimited. What's their attitude about the old mill sites and the potential contamination of all the wildlife? And then my other kind of like question slash comment, I've restored a couple of those ADA blinds that are around the wildlife areas. And I know Washington has the Washington Waterfowl Association, and there's Ducks Unlimited. Do you guys accept volunteers out there to do cleanups and maybe blind repairs and kind of like grooming the sites before waterfowl season and after waterfowl season? And that's about it. I like the access and I like the opportunity. You guys do a pretty good job with that. I don't mind bushwhacking, and pretty much that's all I've got is just the habitat concerns about the future and the potential of contamination. So that's it. I'll listen. Go ahead.
I'll take part of this. The I think maybe what you're talking about is like Rainy Island is one of the examples you're talking about, like where the old waste from the mills got pumped out there and into the ponds. This program, we're just looking at the wildlife area management plan, and so those properties are not part of the wildlife area and
What can I?
not
Are you there?
not really
Can I interrupt?
sure. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. The Grace Harbor, the whole South Bank going to Elk River and Johns River, that's state property, correct?
Not all of it, but we certainly have property on the South Bank. Yes.
Yeah, over by the prison, should I say? And then
Mhm.
you go further west, Johns River, then Elk River. And I was in conversation with Mr. Brady and his oysters. He's concerned, but there's a lot of duck clubs up and down. My bigger concern is, the tide comes in and out.
Yeah.
Those sites were pretty rough shape. And I'm talking about the contaminated sites. And it's not just Rainy Island. They're all up and down. And there's, concern with the overall break the chain in the ecosystem, and then you're going to break the chain in the bigger, So that's my opinion, of course. And I know you guys are more so concentrated on your your wildlife areas. So yeah, what do you think if there was some type of bird kill? What do you think the reaction would be? So that's all I got.
I don't think I have the answer to that that question. Like, what if there's a bird kill? Like, what caused it? We'd have to track it down. The contamination issue is from sites not on the wildlife area is a little bit outside the purview of this plan, but it's an important thing for us, I think, to take note of because I don't know that we've really put a whole lot of thought into that possibility. I think the other question you had was volunteers. I think I'll let somebody else answer that. And I don't know who's going to speak up earlier.
Yeah, I can jump in on the volunteer piece. You can just reach out to me through email. It's in the press release. We can kind of get you set up as a volunteer and figure out what works.
And we will have these this presentation available on our webpage for viewing after the meeting. So we have time for one more question, and it looks like it's going to be from Craig. Craig, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to respond to that guy because I've hunted all my life on one side of the family down in Wilsonville, and the other side was Grace Harbor, the Finnish side from Southside Aberdeen. And as a note, all the mills are pretty much gone. The pulp mills, all the stuff. There used to be a day when my grandfather wouldn't keep a duck on Grace Harbor because of the stink of them after killing them. They get into that, all these pollutants as he described. But you know what? Something's happened over the last 50, 60 years. So the mills are gone and the river's healed. And it's not a problem like it was. I'm going to say it's gotten a whole lot better. And I see the beauty of it as all those mills are gone. And because we used to dump all our pollutants in the river back in the day, we used to dump antifreeze in the drains and all the stuff the river went through back in the day. And that's all done and that's over with and it's gone. So I'm just saying there's a big positive here in that the river has healed. There you go.
Thanks, Greg.
All right.
Are you one comment? Am I still on?
You are. Go ahead.
This is Wiles. Thank you. No, I'm not criticizing, but I did take a tour with the river keeper or the water keeper, and we went to like a half a dozen sites out of 24 sites that are at risk of at that moment where a big flood tide will wipe it out. And I'm just saying, on the backside of these levees, on the old mill sites, there's still contaminants. And yeah, I agree. It's beautiful. My first trip out here was 15 years ago, and I hunted the airport. So I know if things are changing, birds are still here. I just hate to see one of those impoundments that are containing a lot of toxins break open and then get into either the oyster beds or the widgeon flats, widgeon grass flats, and it could do a lot of damage, even the shorebirds. And, that's a bigger concern to me is the overall impact. I worked the Gulf oil spill back in 2010, and I've got a lot of experience in Florida, and I just hate to see it happen here. So that's all. And I'll get with you on the emails. Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe Wiles, I'll ask you if you send us a note about what those sites are, like where they are specifically, because I think I have in mind a few of them, but maybe not that many. Something for certainly our habitat folks to know about.
Great. So we'll wrap that up. Thank you everybody for attending this. Really appreciate the engagement. Really great questions, and hopefully we were able to answer them. And feel free to reach out, to staff if you have any additional questions or concerns or anything like that. Again, this will be published on our website for you to see the slides afterward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.